Hello, everybody, and welcome to another fantastic episode of Truth Wanted. I'm your host for tonight, Objectively Dan, and joining me today is someone who's been on this program before. It's been about a year since you've been on. It's ExXian Erin. Erin, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Yes, I think it's been about a year, right?
I think so, right about that, yeah.
Yeah, right about a year since you were on last time, so welcome back to the program. Really excited to have you back on, and we got a special announcement in regards to that a little bit later. But for now, Erin, what's been happening? What's been happening since a year ago from
What's been happening?
however it's been? Yeah.
So this last year, last summer, I did like a lot of interviews because I had basically just come out as an atheist. And then over this last year, I got myself involved in a bunch of different communities, tried to get as many conversations going as I could. I joined a lot of open conversation, open streams. I've done a couple of, I did do a couple other call-in type things before, kind of impromptu, basically trying to immerse myself in the conversation as much as possible in as many different areas as I could. I definitely tried to focus in on learning some of the other kind of traditions of Christianity rather than just the one that I grew up in, because I did talk about last time that I grew up in kind of a fundamentalist Pentecostal background. So I spent a lot of time trying to understand some of the other traditions of Christianity, because I think it's important to be able to have those conversations with anybody, not just the people that I grew up with. So
yes,
I spent a lot of time getting to know a lot of people, and I've made some really good friends. And it's a year later, and I'm still an atheist, so nobody's convinced me.
Still an atheist.
Yeah.
Well, that tends to happen, I think. But speaking of those call-in things, this is one of those call-in things, folks. This is Truth Wanted. This is a live call-in show that happens every single week, Fridays at 7 p.m. Central Time. So if you're listening to a recording of this, come check out the live broadcast. If you're watching this live, hey, we got some open lines right now, and we definitely want to come talk to you. So please come give us a call at the number below on the screen if you're watching on YouTube, or you can find it on this show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts as well. So talking to Erin, ExXian Erin. Don't get confused by the name. I'm sure there's some people who see the two X's in your name, and they're like, is it ExXian Erin? You know, like how you say that, but yeah, that's just kind of a shortening for Christian for those who don't know the X part, right?
Yeah, it's almost like conversation starter at this point. People be like, what the heck? How do you say your name? And to me, I kind of read it in my head as like ExXian Erin, but it just, like you said, it just means ex-Christian Erin. And I recently found out that the T may not be necessary, but I'm not going to change it. I don't care.
I did. I think I did notice that too, actually, the first time I saw it, because I'm used to seeing it as ExXian. Yeah. I think you're one of the only people I've seen with the T in it. But yeah, the message gets across just fine. It's branding at this point. You can't really change it, right?
It's too late. I don't care.
Yeah, it's too late for that. One thing I admired about you, Erin, when you first were really posting stuff on the scene a little over a year ago, you were posting stuff like every single day. You still post quite a bit on social media. And I only post on Twitter pretty much. And even then, I do not post every day. And I kind of wish I did. And I always try to think of stuff. Sometimes I just post pictures I find that are interesting and stuff. But you're out there all the time doing that. How do you do that? Do you just find things to post, or what's that process like?
I would call it almost like an open stream to my brain and my thoughts that I have. So I had deconverted. I had identified myself as an atheist in 2019, and I started posting on Twitter in 2020. But one thing that I realized really quickly was that even after you leave a religion or leave any kind of high control group, there's still a lot of deconstructing to do. So I feel like, especially that first year, and it's less so now, but it continues to happen, that almost on a daily basis, there'd be some new thing that would come to me that I would realize that that's messed up, or I need to reconsider this. So I basically just made it a public thing where I would have my thoughts out loud to other people. And I think the reason why people found my page is because I was giving some language and some thought to what other people were also working through at the same time. So I've never really shied away from maybe being a little more controversial or maybe being a little bit like rude at some point. But to me, I'm trying to be true to my experience and trying to be like really get the language right in my experience growing up in that kind of environment and the ongoing effects it's had on my life even as an adult. So I'm older now, I'm married, I've got 2 kids, and I still find myself deconstructing all these, months and months later after I've even realized I had lost my faith. So it's a continual thing. So I think I do post a little bit less these days, but it has nothing to do with the fact that I'm not pulling away from it. I've just been quite busy with my kids lately.
I gotcha. Maybe you experienced this too. In fact, I think we've talked about this, but this, like as soon as you go through this deconversion process, whatever you want to describe it as, there's almost like this firebrand atheism that's really easy to get into. I know it was for me a little bit. I used to check like r/atheism every day. I was really looking at that stuff, and just because I don't know if it was the anger or if it was just like the realization or just like, everything kind of finally clicking and making sense. And I wanted to like share that with everybody. But there was definitely that phase where I was like way more, I want to say active because I'm pretty active now, but just more, I don't know. I was willing to insert it into more conversations in my daily life than I did now, I guess. I don't know, but that seems to be a common thing that happens with people. Did you kind of have that phase as well?
I did, and I think some parts of me kind of was denied that I was like an angry atheist. And I even last year, I would say, I think I called myself an angry deconstructionist, or maybe I was flailing because there's so many emotions that come about it. And I mean, the anger is really legitimate. And so I think it's a valid part of coming away from something like that. And it's not that I'm like less angry now. I feel like I've processed it a little bit more now. And so I can come at it with a little bit more like nuance. And especially over all the conversations I've had over this last year, I'm not as quick to jump on somebody if they say something like, oh, that's a logical fallacy or whatever. I think I'm a little bit more patient with that. And I can't forget the fact that like since I deconverted, I've gone to therapy and I've actually processed a lot of the trauma I was experiencing too. I think that's one thing that maybe goes unrecognized when people make a meme out of angry atheists, is actually how much hurt and trauma and frustration there genuinely is. It's not just people on the internet necessarily just trying to pick a fight with somebody. There is a lot of things that need to be processed, and sometimes it just happens online. So
yeah, and that's tricky too, because there is a stereotype from Christians that talk about atheists in that, the reason why they are the way they are is because the church failed them. The church hurt them in some sort of way. And that's definitely true for a lot of people. That's definitely true. But I've also met people where, it was really just more of a distancing, and they realized upon later reflection, like, this is why this is, and this makes sense now. I don't know if I would say that I've been traumatized by my experiences, maybe, but I definitely have been emotionally affected by some of my experiences. Less to do more so with like what I believe to be malicious actors, but just people acting within an ideology and a framework that causes them to behave and respond in ways that I find to be absolutely deplorable now, or just something I don't want to be around. Like I bring this up quite a bit, but my casual acceptance and promotion of homophobia. I grew up in a homophobic place of the world, and like just the casual use of the F word and use of that kind of language just didn't mean anything to me. And I didn't realize I was perpetuating a larger system there. And in some ways that makes me a victim because I didn't know, but that doesn't also mean that I'm not still contributing to other people's harm in that. So it's complicated. It's complicated. And it definitely takes time to kind of deconstruct all of that for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing I've realized since my leaving of religion is that not everybody is traumatized by it. So you have to be thoughtful in how you have these conversations online, because one thing I've learned in the last year is to come at it with a little bit more openness to hearing what other people's experiences were like. There's people in the religion and out who have had good experiences and bad experience. And the most important thing is to actually be open to hear what they're actually saying about it. And you're always going to make more progress with somebody when you've shared, when you've built some rapport and get to know somebody. Just arguing for the sake of arguing, maybe there's a few people who are watching who see that, but it's not always as productive as getting to know people and putting some time in with it.
Yeah. And for me too, it's like, well, now I have the rest of my life to be angry. I don't have to spend it all in one day, because it's not like the whole world is going to change the way I think in a day. It's just not going to happen. So I don't know, that gives me a sense of patience in a way, but doesn't mean that it's not frustrating to have those conversations sometimes, because it's like, look, I've been through this whole journey, and you're coming to this to me. It's like, this is your first time talking about this stuff. There's a little bit of that sometimes that I find to be frustrating. But speaking of frustrating, there is a very topical and at the same time not topical thing that's been happening in the news that I think we both agreed we wanted to talk about tentatively for this episode. And that is the recent discoveries of the mass graves within some of the Indigenous schools within Canada. Now, I didn't really know much about this until about a year ago, when I heard, I believe it was a Behind the Bastards podcast episode on some of these schools that work in Canada that were mostly run by the Catholic Church, and displaced Native communities and put them into these, they went to these schools, and unfortunately hid a lot of, the deaths that happened around these areas. And, it seems from what I learned from that was that this has never been a question of, do these exist, but how many?
Yeah. Which
we're continuing to discover. These schools ended up closing, the last ones in the 1990s, which
1996.
is crazy to think about, but it's been still going on. And there's more being found recently that people are really upset about. And what is there to be but outraged at this, right?
Yeah, definitely. So we talked earlier, I did want to bring it up a little bit. I'm Canadian. And yesterday was July 1st, which is our Canada Day, which is kind of like your July 4th. And there was quite a big movement for people to choose to spend their time differently yesterday, rather than going to parades and that sort of thing, to maybe take some time to recognize the horror that the Indigenous community is going through right now. Like you said, Dan, there's a history of residential schools, they're called them, but they weren't schools. They were a place that the government and the Catholic Church, they took a lot of the Native or Indigenous children away from their families and put them into these residential schools where they lived full time, basically trying to teach them how to not be Indigenous anymore. And unfortunately, they were not cared for there, and thousands of children went missing during that time. And one of the things that the Indigenous community has said is they've been trying to tell us for years that they've known that these people were missing for years and years, but not a lot of people were listening. But recently it's come to light that through radar detection and that sort of thing, that they have discovered bodies basically around and under the residential schools. And right now we're up to 1,500, and we've only gone through, I think, 7 out of 100, and I'll get the number wrong, but I think it's 130 something schools around Canada. So yesterday we joined in on that action, and we didn't go to any parades, and we wore our orange shirt, which is the color that honors that movement going on here. So it's a really tough one, and it hits really close to home. I live really close to this area. I have friends in the community, and it breaks my heart. And it's just overall, it's one of those things that we need to talk about, and we need to hear about the experiences that these communities have gone through. It's been really heartbreaking.
Yeah, the online atheist movement, as I've seen it, and this is from a subjective me perspective, in the past decade has intersected more with progressive politics and having those kinds of discussions. And this is a fantastic example of one of those intersections, which is Christianity and its colonialism and its impact on the world, and how we're addressing it today, and how we're dealing with the consequences of that. There's been a long and marked history of Christians coming into other people's spaces, telling them this isn't the way you need to do things. You need to do things our way, and not only erasing the natural landscape of a people's culture, but also degrading it, and at worst, having the bodies of children dug underneath a school. Like, this is a very visceral example of what has been a long, hundreds of years spanning thing that I don't think we have fully dealt with the ramifications of, which is why this is so shocking to people. I mean, the fact I didn't know about this. I didn't know about this until like a year ago.
Yeah.
And I'm talking to people every day who haven't heard about this until recently. So what does that say about what I know about the full impact and the scale of what Christian colonialism has done on the world, let alone just the United States or Canada?
Yeah. It is really troubling to see how many people aren't aware of like our history. And I think a lot of people are really shocked that this thing happened in Canada. But I think I was really fortunate that I had a really fantastic history teacher in high school. I've known about this, but even myself, I've made efforts to learn about this throughout my life. Even I don't know everything yet, and I'm doing my best to learn as much as I can. But running into so many people who have no idea. We've even talked to people who didn't realize that there was a connection here. Why would anybody consider taking Canada Day and not celebrating it in the way that we normally have? And why should we honor this community during like what we would have as normally as a national holiday? You go to parades, you do these things. And one of the best quotes that I'd heard yesterday was when somebody that and your neighbors are having a funeral, you don't throw a party. And that's really kind of the feel that I think has been going on with myself and with many people I know, that we're trying to do our best as people who are not maybe directly in the community, but maybe are just doing our best to honor them as much as we can, and to educate ourselves. There's a lot there that we aren't aware of, and it's up to us to learn and to educate ourselves and to make better decisions going forward, and to work towards ending the different ways that the community is still being treated unfairly.
Absolutely. The recent news, if anything, has just reinforced this idea in my mind that Christianity as a net good, which is an argument that's sometimes put out there, that even, there's been bad things that have happened in the past, that overall Christianity is helpful to people. Mm-hmm. I think the families of those children would disagree.
Yeah.
And it's hard people to confront them with this thought, because their defenses go up and say, well, this wasn't me. This wasn't my church. This wasn't my community that perpetuated these acts. And I can only say, no, but it's your ideology that did. It's the history of your ideas that brought to that point. And just because they look a little bit different today doesn't mean that a little bit of that is still there in one way or another. And you see that in multiple instances and in multiple ways, in the idea that America is supposed to be a Christian nation, in this idea that you can't be a good person without believing in God, or that the Bible should be the standard moral framework by which every citizen should be measured and judged. And it becomes more pathetic every day to me, because how many times do we have to see the hypocrisy? Do we have to see the absolute savagery that people who supposedly believe the same things that you and I once did, if not more fervently so, were able to commit just on a daily basis? And it's just really heartbreaking to see. And I really wish more of my Christian friends would see it from the perspective that we do, as people who once believed, and see that, I look at this as shameful, but also a relief that I don't have to, tie myself to that anymore, that I'm trying to at least make myself better, if anything. Right.
Yeah, it's really wild. In my experience with this too, is that so much of the culture, so growing up in a Christian community, it was really normal to just kind of almost flippantly discuss their spiritualism and their culture as like something to do demonic, and like viewing it under that Christian framework. And I don't think there's enough awareness yet about the repercussions of what that caused in their community to have that negative connotation put on their entire culture. And one of the biggest things I think is important for us to remember is like, it didn't happen all that long ago. It's still in the living memory of a lot of people. We're only, 1 to 2, sometimes 3 generations past these, almost a clear erasure of an entire culture. So there's a really beautiful movement coming back of people who are trying to kind of reconstruct that. Even people who don't have their connection with their history they're doing their best to kind of reconstruct that and get reconnected into that. And I want to support that as much as I can, because it's a really beautiful thing that I think a lot of people have no idea about. So I think it's something that I will continue to talk about.
Yeah. And I also want to challenge myself to continue to learn more and try to, be a better human, because I know that even just being the person that I am, being a straight white guy, that has given me and afforded me all the privileges with that background has given me, along with all the other labels you can apply to me, right? Like I'm still constantly deconstructing what that means for myself and how I can be a better person in that regard. I always want to be better. I guess that's what it is. I always want to be better. And news like this just really reminds me of how much we all have to learn. It's tragic, but I would like to move on if we can, unless some folks want to call in about it tonight, and we will be happy to talk to you guys. But we do have a couple of callers on the line that we want to get to now. Erin, are you ready to talk to some folks?
I am. Yeah, let's go.
All right, let's do it. But before we get to that, we do want to give a special shout out to the patron of the week, like we always do. Every single week, we give a shout out to somebody who donates on patreon.com/truthwanted. We want to thank everybody that donates to the Patreon, but we want to give a special shout out every week. And this week's patron of the week is Katie Stewart. Katie, thank you so much for donating to the show. Katie is awesome. And Katie helps make this show happen. So thanks, Katie, for doing that. Appreciate you. And she's supposed to be off tonight, but I heard that she's in the chat. So thanks, Katie, for donating. That's really awesome. I didn't know that was going to be the one today.